You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. On this episode, I welcome writer and paranormal enthusiast Fiona Dodwell to take us on a deep dive into the world of haunted and cursed dolls, exploring both real-life accounts and the pop culture inspired by them. A creepy, addictive and informative book, a cursed collection of haunted dolls beckons us to discover the dark and disturbing world of toys gone bad. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/Mysteries and Monsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. And you can also click the link in the show notes as usual. Thank you to each and every one of you that continue to support the show. And thank you to my latest patron, Aurora. Welcome to the team, and thank you for joining. Mysteries and Monsters is across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for news, episodes and updates. Our exclusive merchandise site is available via TeePublic, and you can find the link for that in the show notes. And thank you to the latest purchasers of some t-shirts. Our intro and outro music is performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his artwork, and the show is produced by Mr. Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. Now then, let's join Fiona as we prepare to get scared by what the toys may be up to when we're not paying attention. The history of haunted objects is nothing new in the world of the paranormal, but one particular niche seems to cause more fear and trepidation than the rest, and that is, of course, haunted dolls, with the most famous member of this group currently in the headlines, which of course is Annabelle, who seems to be the torchbearer for these haunted items. Joining me to uncover the stories behind some of them is author Fiona Dodwell. Fiona, welcome to Mysteries and Monsters.
Hello, thanks for having me on the show.
You are very welcome. I'm delighted to dive into this particular subject. I don't really think I've covered it for quite a long time. I had a wonderful chat about 5 or 6 years ago in my early days with the author David Weatherly, which uncovered a deep love in me of Robert the Doll. Which I never thought I would have, Fiona. I used to believe this subject was a little bit out there, but as I've discovered doing this show, my perception of what is out there has diminished further and further the longer I've been speaking to people such as yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those subjects, I think, that because of the Hollywood adoption of the subject, you know, we have the sort of the Annabelle franchise films and Child's Play, Dolly Dearest and all those classic films. I think it's become, like, to some people a bit of a far-fetched caricature that makes people feel quite distant from what perhaps is more the reality of the subject. So it might be surprising to some people whose only knowledge is of those kinds of films to actually delve into the more realistic side and people's true experiences. It might change their perception of the subject as a whole, I think.
It is a fascinating aspect of this, primarily as long as we've had entertainment either through film or television and books as well, Fiona. Haunted dolls have always been with us. And I suppose when you open yourself up to joining the world of the supernatural and the paranormal, a lot of us get hooked at an early age. Did dolls come to you at the beginning as part of your interest in learning about the paranormal as a child and a young person? Or was this something that you've kind of gravitated towards later in your life as you've uncovered more strangeness throughout it?
Yeah, I think it's more something that kind of occurred later on in my life. The interest in the paranormal itself was something that came very early. I'd guess maybe 9 or 10 when I started reading like ghost story books and point horror books and getting hooked on creepy literature. And I think that's where it began for me. And then as I got a little bit older, I started to read about true life accounts and shows, documentaries. and it really become like a real passion of mine. But it was definitely in later years that when I was reading about cases like Annabelle and, as you mentioned earlier, Robert and Peggy the doll as well, it's when I sort of started branching out, it became a bigger pull for me, because we all have the general interest in haunted houses and buildings and land, but the whole concept of, perhaps objects themselves can also have energy attached. That just something about that really kind of gripped me. And so it's kind of been an interest quite a lot for me in recent years.
I mean, as you say in your book, in the first chapter, the history of dolls is something that's been intrinsically linked with human evolution, I think, over the years. You can go back millennia to see that dolls have been included in burial rituals and for the entertainment of children, perhaps a lot earlier than people would gather. I think sometimes the history of toys and dolls is something we often think is a modern invention. We seem to, I don't know why there is this perception that people before the Christian era began didn't want their children to be happy, or the concept of play is a modern invention, because you look at cultures from all around the world, from Siberia to Babylon to the Greeks, to the Romans, the Mesopotamians. There's evidence of toys and dolls being created for children throughout our sort of recorded history.
Yeah.
And it's obviously in the modern era, it's become a business. There are numerous companies that have built fortunes on creating dolls, teddy bears, replicas, whatever. And in the modern era, they now become highly collectible. They're not just for children anymore. Maybe they never were, Fiona, but we've yet to stumble across a Babylonian grave of a 40-year-old man with a collection of dolls.
Exactly. It might happen yet, but yeah. You're right. It's going way back in history, like in tombs in ancient Egypt. We're uncovering examples all the time, thousands and thousands of years old. And while some of them are associated with children and as toys, there are also some that are apparently linked to early religious rites and used for ritual purposes as well. So even back then, way back, going to the earliest examples, we have that paradox of them being for children's entertainment, but also for spiritual purposes as well. So, which is interesting to me.
Oh, very much so. I think not so much these days. I think the perception is that through archaeology, we're beginning to understand that some of the older cultures were not as simple as people used to believe. And I think, as with anything, anybody who's investigating anything at this particular time would often think that they are the cleverest people that have ever lived, and which I think is a very foolish stance to take, because history is littered with geniuses of all descriptions, from all walks of life, from all parts of the world. And so we often don't appreciate the intelligence, I think, sometimes, and the power that people had with that. I mean, as I touched on in regards to some of the burials that we found, we've discovered, that the Neanderthals used to leave treasures in their graves, and they are no longer these simple hunter-gatherers that died out. The perception of those people has changed so dramatically in our lifetimes, Fiona, that, like you say, you never know. We may discover a tomb in the next decade or so that will just once again turn everything on its head. And so this seems to be something that has really caught fire in the modern era, I think. But as I referred to in regards to the media, creepy dolls have always been a source of horror in that particular genre. And I have a couple that have often caught me unawares, Fiona, that I didn't expect to have the emotional response to a doll being frightening, I have to say.
So which was that then? Which?
Well, I've got two. I've got Hugo from Dead of Night.
Oh, yeah.
Because that, I think, is one of the great British horror films ever made, especially as a portmanteau. So it's quite an unusual one that we don't see very often in this day and age. But it's so well made, and it's kind of chapters that are all linked by the narrator with an incredible twist at the end. But my favourite part of that is the is the awful Hugo, who just seems to be a real cad.
Yeah.
And you kind of see a very similar version of that in Magic with Anthony Hopkins, where has he gone mad, or is the doll really possessed, as it were?
Yeah.
But I was kind of prepared for that because I'd seen Dead of Night. I saw Dead of Night before I saw that, so I was a bit made of sterner stuff, so I wasn't too frightened.
You were already for it.
Yes. But Chucky, I have to say, I did not expect Chucky, Child's Play, as a lover of 80s horror and slashers and things. Child's Play really caught me unawares, especially the scene where the mum's trying to get the batteries out of this damn doll, and there aren't any. And then he starts swearing at her and beats her up. And that just really frightened me, and I don't know why.
There's something really unsettling about the whole thing of this doll looking so cute and innocent, and it looked like the kind of doll that any child could have in their home and any child could be playing with, and it just turns that whole concept on its head, doesn't it? Just this sweet little innocent toy could actually be plotting something absolutely awful. And there's just something really unsettling, because we all have them in our homes, or we all know someone with them, we played with them as children, and there's just something that just really, I don't know, it really just unsettles me anyway, because that film, especially the Child's Play film, with Chucky, just with that cute face, cute eyes, the fact that he was out to just kill and destroy everyone around him, I mean, it certainly had its funny moments, but I think beyond that, the theme itself of just a child's toy kind of inserting itself into a family's life and causing such destruction, just something very creepy about it, definitely.
And I suppose he's probably the best cinematic example of this, because he's become a cultural phenomenon. I mean, here we are, it's, 35 years since Child's Play came out. We've had sequels, we've had people reevaluating certain aspects of it and saying this might be a horror film about two dolls that fall in love, but it's looking at deeper questions, and people start to elevate certain members of a slasher franchise about dolls to a certain level, and you suddenly begin to think that there's a lot more to this. It's not as simple as, maybe the first couple were a bit like that, but after that they start following really strange directions, and Chucky is quite a totem for people these days. He's had series, we've had sequel after sequel. He's probably the most famous scary doll in film, I would suggest now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just have a memory of when I was younger, and I wasn't allowed to watch horror films at this point in time, but I just caught a little scene of it when I was a child, and I kind of snuck downstairs and my parents had it on, and I was like, oh my God, it really gripped me. It was almost like not seeing it properly was more frightening than perhaps if I had seen it, just seeing a little glimpse of this cute ginger doll and knowing that, oh, this is supposed to be evil, something awful is going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I just grew up absolutely loving the series and franchise, and I knew that I had to include it in the book, actually. And thankfully, Don Mancini, the director and the writer, he was interviewed for the book, because there are two parts to the book. The first is the true life cases and examining the reality. And then in the second part of the book, I do talk to people who have worked in film that have focused on haunted or cursed dolls. So Don Mancini, I interviewed him, and it was really fascinating, because like you said, there is so much depth to not just Chucky as a character, but what he symbolises, and a lot of the themes in the series and the TV show, the spin-offs. And Jennifer Tilly also, who plays Tiffany, I interviewed her too, and I certainly came away with a great appreciation for what goes into the films themselves. More than just the gimmick of a quick scary flick sort of thing. It just seems much more deeper, and it has such a huge cultural impact. Absolutely.
I mean, Jennifer Tilly is a prime example, because she's a great actress. She's appeared in some incredible films over the years. I think Bound is one of my personal favourites that she did with Gina Gershon, I think, about 30 years ago. God. But she's become synonymous as Tiffany. She's probably more famous for voicing a psychotic, lovesick doll than she is for some of the award nominees that she's had over the years in real films, which I suppose for an actor, that's a very unusual decision to come to terms with, I suppose. But I think the great thing about Jennifer is she absolutely loves it. She adores the fact that people think she's Tiffany, and I think obviously the doll's very much modelled after as well, which is credit to the writer and the director, that they've used her as the template for Tiff. And essentially, it's basically a doll version of Jennifer that we see that is essentially just channeling her talent.
Yeah, and I think that's what made it fun for Jennifer, because she was good friends with Don, and when they got together and discussed her doing the role, I think they had a lot of fun because they're able to use her as that kind of guideline. Her character and the way she carried herself was very much influenced by who she actually is. So I think she was able to have a lot of fun and personal input in the decisions about her character and some of the things that would happen to her, and some of the lines even in the film. She was the one that would come up with certain things that she thought would work. I think so. She's put so much of herself into that series that she's adopted it as one of her special roles as well. And I know that from having spoken to her and read other interviews that she's done, she's very much, she loves what the way that the fans receive the series, and she loves being stopped as Tiffany, and she's really adopted that role, which is lovely.
Yes, it's good when an actor embraces a kind of off-kilter role. That occasionally you will see certain actors who get certain roles and they don't want to be typecast, or they don't like the baggage that comes with a certain role, or sequels, and they say, no, I don't really want to do this one, and you see it sometimes. But Jennifer is a prime example of, she adores being Tiffany, and I would imagine Tiffany adores being Jennifer. Sometimes it's very difficult to work out where Jennifer stops and Tiffany starts, and vice versa. Yeah,
there's just so much of her in that character. Definitely, yeah. You can just tell that she's had a lot of fun with the role. Definitely.
I suppose before we return to the cinematic and televisual dolls, because there's a couple of other franchises, and I don't want to sort of deviate and start boring you talking about Puppetmaster too early anyway. So I suppose one of the things about this is, regardless of our loves of the paranormal and haunted locations and places, there is often some trepidation, Fiona, when you enter this particular subject, because of the alleged histories and deaths and strangeness and all kinds of things that are often attributed to certain dolls. As we've mentioned, we've got the big three really are Annabelle, Robert and Peggy. And without sort of wanting to dive into this too much, we can't really dive into this subject without dealing with the elephant in the room, really, which is obviously the current situation with Annabelle, who was on tour with her owner. They've been going on tour. The gentleman has sadly passed away whilst on tour. Some people are saying, oh, well, it's quite a shock because of his age. And what I found quite peculiar is that this gentleman's passing seems to be secondary to a lot of the reporting that's going on, to the fact that he was doing this tour with Annabelle. Yeah. And it's almost as if the doll is more important than the person we've lost, which I find quite odd, I have to say.
Distasteful as well, isn't it?
Yes.
To him and his family, I think because the whole Annabelle legend is so well known across the world, and her case has fascinated people for so many years now, since the 70s really. Anything to do with her grabs attention, and I think it's one of those things where if anything happens around her, because we've almost come to expect her to be associated with bad events and bad luck, we look for something that validates that. And in some cases it might seem harmless, but I think when it comes to the reporting on somebody's death like that, which was obviously very tragic, it seems that people should tread a bit more carefully, the mainstream press especially, with the way that they handle it. So rather than making it a bit of a pop culture footnote, this is actually with somebody's life, and it feels disrespectful to minimise his experience and the loss of him to making it in a bigger story about Annabelle. So it's just something I know I personally want to tread carefully around,
Absolutely. I mean, it's been going on for a week, I think, now, since he sadly passed away. And you can see the schisms in the paranormal community about it. You've got the people who are saying, oh my God, this is horrific. What's going on here? How is this not proof of Annabelle's power? And then you've got a lot of other people saying, hang on a minute, what about Dan Riviere? What about his family? What about his friends? What about the people that were part of this organisation with him? where is the respect for them? And you've even got people criticising the family setting up a GoFundMe for his funeral costs and things like that, going, oh, well, why does he need the money? He's on tour with Annabelle. He should be rolling in money, which I think, once again, you're projecting your personal opinions onto the death of somebody that's probably hasn't got anything to do with the fact that he's got Annabelle with him. He's just unfortunately passed away whilst working.
Yeah, he was just doing his job, and then something awful happened, and then people have run away with that, haven't they? And projected their own, like you said, their own beliefs onto it and expectations. But it is awful what's happened. It was predictable. Like, as soon as I heard that it happened, I thought this is going to be something that everyone's going to run away with, just because of the story being so huge with Annabelle. And I suppose people who do believe that she is demonic or cursed, I have seen people online say comments like, well, she does have an evil energy attached. She was told by the Warrens not to be moved, and now look what's happened. But I think the truth is, the bottom line is, we'll never be able to comment on that. We'll never be able to really know. And so to kind of use this man's death to make an easy headline from, just seems tasteless to me.
And it's one of those things as well that, anybody who knows anything about haunted dolls knows that Annabelle's been here, there and everywhere. And most of the people that have been associated with her have been absolutely fine. But as often is the case with strangeness, people tend to concentrate on the thing that supplants their point or their argument. Yeah. And ignore the vast amount of evidence that says, no, she doesn't go around killing people on tour. She's usually everything's fine. And we're talking about one particular person here. And therefore, that once again is one of those unconscious bias, out in front bias, that people aren't interested in facts. That proves their point, regardless of anything else that's happened in Annabelle's previous 50 years.
Yes, yeah. And I agree with that. And I mean, if that's likely to happen, then, like you said, there would be a lot more, because people have seen her and witnessed her and been in the flesh next to her over the years, haven't they? It reminds me of that scene. I think Zach Bagans did a show and a special episode where he was told not to touch Annabelle the doll, and Zach went ahead and touched the doll anyway, and obviously was absolutely fine. And I'm sure that would be the case for most people, So I think just people have to tread carefully, and people are entitled to their beliefs. If they do think that Annabelle is demonic, people are entitled to believe that. I think it's just a case of keeping that moral line there of, when you're commenting on someone's life and their loss and the family they're left behind, they're grieving,
Absolutely. Did the subject, in regards to this, Fiona, because a lot of these characters, these dolls, come with baggage and histories, some exaggerated, some perhaps not, was there a little trepidation for you writing a book on this particular subject? Because I know some people just don't really want to, regardless of whether... It's one of those things, Fiona, I found in life. A prime example of this was, I went to a talk several years ago with Dr. David Clarke, who had a whole collection of the Crying Boy.
Oh, yeah.
And I was in a university lecture room with a lot of learned, educated doctors. And the amount of people that basically pushed themselves as far against the wall as they could to essentially slide out the lecture room, Fiona, because Dr. Clarke had placed the pictures next to the door, was incredible. Even though, I mean, he was one of those people that sort of uncovered the reason these pictures didn't burn was of what they were painted on, and the material was quite flame retardant. And so it's the 80s. There was a lot of people who fell asleep after being in the pub and thought they wanted a portion of chips in their old chip pan.
Yeah.
And so even with an educated audience who probably believe it's all stuff and nonsense, some of them didn't want to take that chance. And you see this with dolls. Regardless, there seems to be the power and the story of the object often will override a viewer or a participant's intelligence or belief in the power of the supernatural. It's almost as if seeing the object physically or being in the same room as it, suddenly their their protection of intelligence or their belief system begins to crumble somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of power behind the what if kind of question. And I think you might even be able to get the most hardened skeptic. But I think deep down, everyone has a little gap there, a very narrow part of their mind that thinks, but what if, and if I'm in that situation and I put myself in that predicament of perhaps touching an item like that or owning one or being in a room with one, on that off chance that there is something to it, then I don't want anything to do with it. And that's where that phenomena comes of people backing away or having a different attitude than if they weren't in the room with that actual item or object. I think it just brings back the whole question mark, what if it's true? And it, not worth the risk, perhaps, with some of the horror stories that you hear. It just plays on your doubts momentarily.
Yes. Yeah. Was it a situation that after each chapter you would say to yourself just to make sure, Fiona, or were you okay and you thought, I'm going to deal with this subject as a matter of interest and nothing more? You didn't sort of begin to get the heebie-jeebies covering certain people, because obviously, Annabelle's reputation is well known. Robert the doll is another one, because Robert, I really like Robert, and I kind of fell into this trap, Fiona, of belief, because I remember when my show first started, it was doing okay, and it was picking up steadily, and then from sort of Robert, the show where I was discussing Robert, and I had one of the organisations that looks after Robert very kindly let me use one of their particular photos of him, and made sure I'd asked permission, so I'm already falling down that rabbit hole. And then within 6 weeks, COVID hit. And now I'm not saying Robert started COVID. That's not where I'm going here. But then my show got incredibly popular from the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know if the end of the world made people want to listen to a man from Yorkshire more. I'm not sure. But I don't know. After a couple of months, I began to think, was it because I was so nice about Robert? Has Robert blessed me? And I began to think, what am I doing here? People are stuck at home and they're bored, Paul. That's why. That's what's happening here. It's nothing to do with Robert. But I was very careful to be very nice about him, regardless. I'm not going to be dismissive and say people that talk about him are delusional or idiots, because there is something about Robert's story that really struck with me. I don't know whether it's how he looks or that little suit he wears, or the fact that people send him joints. From all around America, people send him spliffs and to chill him out, which I found one of those things about this particular subject hilariously interesting, because I thought, why are people sending a doll marijuana to try and keep him chilled out? That's a whole different level, really, isn't it?
You couldn't. That's better than any fiction, really, isn't it? Just Alex sending a dollar spliff. It up, but going back to what you said about Robert the doll when you do in your podcast, and I do think there was a time around sort of the time that COVID hit, and a lot of people had unexpected time at home, and I think it gave people a bit of a breathing space to perhaps look into things that they don't normally look into. There was certainly sadly a lot of losses around as well, which probably drove people to ask some of the questions that they don't spend much time on, such as, is there life after death? So there might have been an element of that to why people were turning to things like podcasts and books and shows like this. I can't kind of footnote this with a source. I don't remember where I read it, but I do have a recollection some time ago saying that there was an increase in reports of paranormal activity because people and families were spending more time in their home during lockdown and were noticing things that perhaps were normally easy to miss in their busy lives when they're out and about and not at home so much,
Yes, absolutely. A great aspect. I don't know what it was like around the world, but obviously a large proportion of people here in the UK, Fiona, were basically told to stay at home and got paid to do so for 3 months. As a frontline worker, I still, we had reduced hours, but I carried on work. I'm glad we did, actually. I seem to have been one of the first people that got through the first lockdown without becoming an alcoholic, or building a toilet roll mountain or something like that. But I mean, it's crazy looking back 5 years ago, really. But I know exactly what you're talking about. There seemed to be an incredible increase in the amount of people who had begun to notice strange things in their house because they were there all day, whereas normally they'd be at work or perhaps the little cracks and creaks and knocks and that door that sometimes opens for no reason. They seem to notice things more. And the skeptics would say, oh, well, these people are never at home, so they don't understand what their house sounds like. But you also say, well, houses are now full of electronic equipment because often the perception is that, this is something to do with electromagnetic frequencies and stuff. You would suggest that more houses have more stuff flying around in regards to, Wi-Fi and electronics emitting signals and currents being sort of flying through the air all the time that we just aren't aware of. You would suggest that more people should be misinterpreting the way electronic signals are working in their homes rather than it just being lockdown that began to cause that. And I think, like you say, I think more people had time to take a step back, be interested and have conversations and watch and read things that perhaps they didn't have the opportunity to indulge in more. And therefore, I think people's perception became a lot clearer. I think dismissing it as, well, people are never at home, I think is very, very foolish. If this was people who were out every night, then fair enough. But most people spend most of their time at home, one would suggest. Yeah,
absolutely. I think people aren't as quick to jump to the ghost conclusion either as what some skeptics might suggest. I think most people are actually more at the other end of the spectrum where they would be more cautious about coming forward and saying, oh, well, I saw or heard something weird in my house last night. It's not usually the first thing people would jump to because, people are worried about being judged or laughed at. So I think for a lot of people to come forward and say, this is really happening, I think it deserves a little bit of, at least some serious thought anyway, or consideration, rather than being sort of like a flippant rejection of people's experiences. But going back to your earlier comment, whether your show did well because you were nice to Robert, you never know. Maybe that was the case, and that was something I was aware of when I was writing the book, actually, because I knew I was writing about, Robert himself and Annabelle and loads of other cases. There's always that thought in your mind, if something was, to happen, it does cross your mind. But I only ever wrote in a respectful way anyway. I mean, I am a believer that objects can be haunted. I'm not saying that it's common or every other doll we pick up in a charity shop is haunted. I'm not saying that, but I do think the phenomenon's possible. And so I did write about the subject with respect, but me and the publisher, Llewellyn, were quite careful because we did consider having photographs of Peggy and Robert, and we opted to have an illustrator draw pictures of them and put a disclaimer at the beginning of the book as well. And and my husband was quite surprised at that. He said, "Oh, that sounds very serious." And I thought, well, some people, myself included, do believe that there's some validity to a lot of this, and better safe than sorry might be the wisest thing. Because I mean, I don't know if you recall, but with Peggy the doll, there are people saying, "Oh, I saw her photo in the newspaper and I felt really ill."
Yeah,
and people attributing like sickness and strokes to having viewed pictures. So I suppose it's, if you're a believer, you might not want to necessarily sit and open a book and think, oh God, and have that play on your mind after. I've just sat and looked at a picture of him and I wish I hadn't. You don't really want that playing in people's minds either, No, so it was tackled quite respectfully,
Yes. Well, the last thing an author wants is their book to have a reputation of being terrifying. It's the worst Christmas gift you could give someone who's interested in this subject is a book chock full of pictures of Annabelle and Robert. And so I understand exactly where you're coming from when you wrote that at the beginning. Mm-hmm. While some people might just find that quite silly, I found, as you say, you've got to be respectful, because regardless of where you're coming from in this particular subject, there are people whose belief cannot be dissuaded from this particular subject. Mm-hmm. And I think when it comes to haunted objects, I've kind of really sort of come to terms with the concept, ironically, from quantum physics. Because I remember listening to an interview Michio Kaku did several years ago, and he was talking about tables and chairs having consciousness, but on a level that we just don't understand right now, because we don't really know that much about the universe about us, and therefore everything has a concept of intelligence on a certain level, as well as you look at the concept of animism as well, which is something that, whilst a lot of people might not think they believe in, there is a lot of concept of the way people feel comfortable in nature and feel more settled in that, as almost as if they're picking up a vibration or communication from trees or plants, or that when they go for nice walks in certain scenic locations, they feel revitalised and recharged. It's almost as if nature is charging them up, because they've reconnected with what we always did until the last 300 years of humanity, really, Fiona. And so now the concept of an object picking up negative energy in some kind of way is nowhere near as outlandish as I perhaps thought it was 10 years ago, because of both the concept of understanding more about the paranormal, but also appreciating religious beliefs of animism and quantum mechanics, for God's sake. So when you put those three together, it's an intriguing mixture that leads you down an avenue to suggest, well, why can't they?
Exactly. And I think that's going back to like what I said at the beginning. I think because we took a lot of what we know about haunted dolls specifically from Hollywood and films, it seemed so outlandish and caricaturish that it was hard to take serious as a concept. But I personally, when I began to think about it, taking a step back, and I thought, well, I'm somebody, having had my own experiences, that I believe in spirits and in hauntings. And I thought, well, if an energy can be drawn to or attached to four walls and a ceiling, if we can take it that's possible, then there's absolutely no reason to think that another material, another object form could in its own way have some kind of energy attached to it. So that's really what kind of inspired me to look into the subject more. What it's researching that really that kind of helped me come up with the book in the end. Really, it was asking that question: can a haunted item be real? Can it exist, basically? And I've always thought, and I know this might sound actually quite silly, but when talking about things like hauntings and haunted objects, I've always come up with this. It's hard to describe it. I remember talking to my son about it, because he had a hamster in a cage, and we were talking about things like ghosts and spirits and God. And I said, this hamster in a cage thinks that the whole world is contained in this cage that he's in. He thinks the bars around the cage, the bowl of food, the bottle of water, and you come in to give him his little back a stroke, that's the world. That's what he knows as. He doesn't know that there's a sky beyond this world. He doesn't know that there's Wi-Fi. He doesn't know anything about anything, but that does not mean that these things don't exist. We only know what we are capable of processing at this point in time. So I do think that we are very limited, and I do think that there's a lot that can be uncovered. I feel like we're very far from knowing the full truth about these things.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that's silly at all. I think that's a perfectly excellent explanation. I think that pulls it down to its basic core. That is what it is. We only know what we know. It's as simple as that. And just because we don't know about something doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we know Venus is there. We've never been there, but we know it's there.
Yes, exactly.
It's not painted on. No. Some people would probably say it. But anyway, I'm not falling down that particular rabbit hole. I suppose as well that one of the challenges of this is that once you sort of get past your sort of superstars of this particular genre, as you say, we've got Peggy, we've got Robert, we've got Annabelle. There seems to be a lot of new faces on the block, and one of the ones that you feature quite heavily in the book is Harold, who's had a book written about him. You know the author. He's kind of he's one of the new rising stars of this, if you can have such a thing, rising stars of this particular field. And it is surprising that probably over the last 10, 15 years, there seems to be a good half a dozen that have begun to sort of climb towards the topper echelons of the Haunted Doll League, as it were, Fiona, where these new guys seem to be quite happy to try and make as much a name as possible. And Harold is a prime example of this.
Absolutely. The whole story of Harold really fascinated me. I read the book. It was released, I can't remember what year, several years ago. I remember reading the book that Harold, Anthony Quinata, had written a book about Harold, and he had bought the doll off eBay, and he'd ended up spending a lot of money on it because he had this plan. Anthony had a plan that he wanted to spend time with an allegedly haunted doll and just simply study and write about his experiences. And, the result of that was his book on Harold. And I read that and I found it absolutely brilliant, like really interesting. There was a lot of in-depth research from Anthony's perspective, and Harold is really quite an unsettling character, and a lot of bad luck followed Anthony after buying the doll, which he often attributed to having brought the doll into his home. I would like to get in touch. It's a really strange story because me and Anthony were in touch quite a great deal at one point, and we emailed each other back and forth, and we had a lot of messages on social media, and then all of a sudden I can't get hold of him anywhere. Nobody who I know can either. So, if by some random chance Anthony Quinata listens to this, I would love to hear from him, because you start to get people who think, oh, what's happened then? Because he owns this doll, and why is no one hearing from him anymore? And then that starts sprouting its own little online urban legends. Hear from him, because that's something that I'd like to talk to him some more. We were in contact for when I was writing my book, and we asked him some questions, and he shared some photos with me, which we didn't end up putting photos in the book in the end. But he's a lovely guy, and he really kind of threw himself into the subject of Harold and the ideas of dolls being spirited. And so if by some random chance Anthony listens, it'd be lovely to get back in touch with him, just to put people's little question marks at ease about how he's doing. So.
Absolutely. It shows you doing nothing just exasperates the legend. It makes it even bigger now, because now people are thinking, what's Harold done?
Yeah, exactly. yeah. That's what happens. It just feeds into the legend, doesn't it? Yeah, makes it grow more so.
Absolutely. I suppose another prime example of that is this island of dolls in Mexico City, which I think anybody who's interested in the supernatural will know about, because it is one of those places that is very well known now. There is a lot of, you can visit it. Plenty of paranormal television shows have been there, done investigations. I think even stepping away from the paranormal aspect of it, it's a hell of a strange sight. You will find odd things like this all around the world, where you can go to certain sort of quite out of the way, as strange as it may sound. This particular location is just south of Mexico City, which is one of the busiest places on the planet. And yet this seems to be like a little oasis of calm there, other than the fact that you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these dolls in various states of decay everywhere. They're in trees, they're in houses, they're on roofs, they're in plant pots. You can't move for dolls. And I would imagine even the most balanced person could find that kind of situation on a psychological level disturbing, on top of the alleged history of why this place has become what it has.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'd have to be quite a hardened skeptic to spend a bit of time there and not at least find it a bit creepy at the very least. I've seen sort of footage and photos, and it really is quite a sight to see all these hanging dolls from trees and these kind of dolls with missing eyes, and it is very creepy and unsettling. So even when you take the story of why the place is supposed to be haunted away from it, just the sight alone is quite quite sort of breathtaking and not in a good way. you know, I mean, I'd love to visit. You know, it's a place that I'd be, you know, as someone who has this interest, I would love to go myself at some point. But yeah, I mean, it's been the subject of a lot of articles, and I actually think Anthony brought Harold there for an episode of Ghost Adventures as well. There was an episode filmed at the island where they brought Harold along for the ride, and you know, that was quite interesting as well. So yeah, fascinating location.
Oh, very much so. I think the thing as well about that is that obviously, because it's been going on so long, I think sometimes people forget that dolls these days are not how dolls were 30, 40 years ago. And so some dolls these days have electronics in them. And I suppose one of the things where sense seems to go out of the window in this kind of thing, Fiona, is that if you leave a doll with an electronic device in the middle of a humid island surrounded by water, there's a real chance there's going to be some water degradation there, and therefore the electrics might start playing up a bit. And so when you go in, I've seen shows where people have been there and one of the dolls just starts kicking off or talking, or its eyes start flashing or something, and straight away they all get really freaked out. And you know that if you take those people out of that situation and say to them, right, how does electronics react with water? They'll be able to say, well, it'll make it start acting strangely. Whereas you put them in that situation like, oh my God, they know we're here.
Yeah, it just changes your perception because you're half expecting something unsettling to happen. You know, your mind is primed for something like that to occur, so your mind automatically goes there when, you know, if you're in a situation like a haunted location, things that might otherwise be quite innocent are suddenly seen as potentially sinister, you know. So while there may be truth to a lot of the things that are said to have, you know, a lot of people's experiences at the island, it all has to be taken, you know, these environmental factors have to be taken into consideration.
I suppose one of the other aspects of your research when collating the book as well, Fiona, were you shocked at the amount of alleged haunted dolls you can find on eBay? Because this is the strange thing about this that always makes me chuckle, that the seller and the buyer don't seem to understand the concept of the transaction, because unless you go to the seller's house and pick it up yourself, other people are going to be involved in dealing with this doll, with the post service, right? And if this doll's so bad, why are they quite happy to stick it in the post and think, bugger the postman, he'll be all right, he's not really dealing with it, he's just carrying it about? Is it surprising just how many you can find? I know for a fact I could go on eBay now and I'd probably find hundreds straight away of a variety of prices. It does seem to be one of those paranormal nuggets that people sometimes will go crazy over a certain doll. More often than not necessarily the story, but it's how the doll looks. If the doll looks odd, people tend to think it's probably going to be haunted more so than... I mean, that's the thing when you look at Annabelle in the movie and Annabelle in real life. They're clearly not the same doll because the one in the film looks weird.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's a funny one because, you know, as I've said, I'm someone who believes that dolls and items can be haunted. I don't think that the market that's flooded online with thousands of allegedly haunted items necessarily helps with the credibility, because it makes it too easy for people to say, oh, look at all this fake stuff on there, or all of this can't be haunted, you know, and it makes it a little bit easy to dismiss everything out of hand. You know, all I can say is in my experience during my research, I did look on places like eBay, and yeah, there is a market full of haunted dolls. But if you research carefully, and some of the sellers have their own websites and their own investigation teams even, I think it's about spending time weeding out who you think has more, I guess the word more, backing for their claims. People who sometimes might supply something like a video footage or explain why they think that something's haunted. I mean, I was in touch with someone through eBay, and she had a doll for sale, and she didn't even list it for sale as a haunted doll. She just had this random rag doll for sale. And I just happened to look at the listing because I just thought it looked unusual, and I collect dolls. So I went onto the listing, and the owner said, I'm sure that there's something about this doll. I'm willing to take an offer. Will someone take it off my hands? And obviously, me being me and writing the book I've just written, I thought, we'll go on then. So I knocked a lot off the price, to be fair. And they straight away said, yes, I'll accept the offer. Just please have the doll. I don't want it. I've had nothing but bad luck since having this doll. And I thought, oh God, what have I done actually? I was thinking, no, I lost the plot, because when she said that, I thought she's obviously not in it to make the money, because she was willing to just knock it down to a silly price. And then she was telling me, I'm glad to have it gone because things have gone wrong. And so I thought, okay, then, so I paid her the money and the doll arrived, and I don't think she had any gain to lie. Like I said, she barely made a couple of quid from it. And I haven't noticed anything happen, though, with this doll, you see. So, you might get sellers online that genuinely might think that there is something for their own reasons, and it might not be. And that's not an issue of being deceptive. She was upfront. She said it might not be, but bad things have happened, and I just want this doll gone. There might be examples of that. But I'm sure there are people who go around car boot sales and who want to kind of capitalize on people's interests of haunted dolls. So all I can say is I do think that there are some genuine people out there. It's a case of the research and pulling out the people that really seem to be from a genuine place. So it takes a bit of time to look into.
So what's your personal experience? I mean, you mention it in the book in regards to owning perceived haunted dolls, and you're a collector of them.
Yeah.
Is it difficult? Because obviously, if you collect dolls, I think this is, as I say, this is the thing. I think if you see a doll that looks cute, or it's like, say, a bear, a teddy bear or something, I don't know if it's just me, Fiona, but I think the cuter and less strange a doll looks, the fact that it's haunted seems to be elevated more than if something looks really creepy, like, well, Christ, that doll should be haunted if it isn't. Whereas if it's cuter, like, because Robert's a very handsome doll, it seems to elevate their weirdness and the fear that's attached to them. And as a collector of dolls, I would imagine you have some dolls that friends of yours perhaps don't like, or just say, oh, there's something about that one, I don't particularly gravitate towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to illustrate your point, I do have a couple of dolls that, not haunted dolls, a couple of dolls I bought just because I liked the look of them, and they were porcelain dolls that an artist refashioned into creepy looking dolls, so that their features were painted very pale and their eyes were made quite black, and they were made like gothic looking outfits. Yes. And obviously they're designed to look creepy and to look the part, but they're not haunted, or they weren't sold as haunted. But I think you're right. I think when you see something that looks more innocent, you do think it gives you more of a pause for thought, because I think you think someone's trying to dupe you if they come with you looking and present to you this really awful looking doll that looks like scarred and disfigured and absolutely like it wants to murder you from the get-go. I think you're like having you on, whereas, like, my doll Edna, which I write about in the book, I mean, she's not, obviously your listeners won't see her, but she's a very cute doll, and she's a bog standard, there's nothing specifically interesting about, she's sort of, I think, from the 80s maybe, a blonde porcelain doll. And the previous owner, he actually bought her because he wanted to record his own podcast about his experience with a haunted doll, and he ended up so unnerved by her, he ended up locking her in the boot of his car and didn't want anything to do with her. So then I said, well, could I borrow her for a couple of weeks while I'm writing the book? And he said, oh, of course. And then once she come here, he was like, actually, I'm quite happy that she's gone. So she stayed with me, and I did have some, and still do have some, interesting experiences. And it's like you say, it's not necessarily always the dolls that you think look the creepiest. Sometimes it is the more either normal or cute looking dolls that are actually take you by surprise more with what can happen.
I have to say, if somebody locked me in a boot, I'd be annoyed as well.
Well,
to be honest, I wouldn't be treating that person very nicely. I'd be sending all kinds of psychic manipulation their way, I think. So I think perhaps that she's been freed from the boot has chilled her out a bit, and she's quite happy to be in a home where she seems to be appreciated and free from the constraints of a car boot.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's been interesting to have, because I knew I wanted that to be part of my book. I wanted to have one to experiences of my own, if I could, just to write about what that's like, And as I say in the book, nothing. Heads aren't spinning, and the demons didn't unleash from hell, and all this crazy stuff. But things that were odd enough happened to make me give it some credibility in my mind, at least. So it was interesting having that experience as I was writing the book.
I suppose one of the stranger aspects of this is how people perceive haunted dolls coming together. Like you were mentioning about Harold on his tour to Mexico. It is strange how people seem to think that taking a haunted doll to meet another haunted doll, it's almost like some kind of Godzilla film from the 1970s that will have this kind of psychic eruption or this battle between the dolls occur. I mean, obviously, I presume you own more than one alleged doll of haunted upbringing, as it were. Do you keep them together? Do you keep them separate, or do they gravitate towards each other? Because I think sometimes you can when you've got items of a certain nature, or you collect certain things, you tend to put things together that you think works in your head on whatever level. Well, whether it's down to somebody having ADHD or OCD or wherever. Some people like a specific order. Some people just like the way things look when they're set out. Was that something you were conscious of, that you've kept Edna? Because obviously the other doll you mentioned in the book is Bonnie. Did they hang out together? Were they separate? Were they in different rooms? Was Bonnie in a boot as well?
No, Bonnie wasn't in a boot, and I didn't end up going to that sort of extreme. But I kept Edna and Bonnie in a shelf in my bedroom. Some people think I'm mad because they're like, "What, you keep dolls that are supposed to be haunted in your bedroom?" But yeah, I mean, I had them both in the same area of my bedroom. And then I touch upon his story in the book, a large clown that I've got called Knock Knock Harry. And he, out of all three of them, is the one that unsettles me the most. And I keep him separate, although he's separate from the dolls, but he's very much in the central part of the house because I keep him in the lounge. So I have a few people sort of saying, oh, he's creepy, or, a few people saying it feels like his eyes are following you round. And I had the same experience in the first few days of me buying him, and I had him in the lounge, and I, at one point, had to just move him to a different area because when I was cooking in the kitchen, I could see, and I would look in, and it'd feel like these eyes were really looking. And if I was at the other side of the room, it'd still feel like his eyes were following. So obviously that could just be clever artistry on the person, to the person that made him. But there was something definitely unsettling about him. And then little experiments I did, with my Spirit Box app and equipment that I've tried. I've got some quite good results with him. And as you were asking about the mixture of energy, there have been times where I've done EVPs with Harry and had some good results. But the interesting thing is with Edna, I've been talking to Edna before and then had a voice come through saying it's not Edna, it's Harry, in quite a deep voice. And it's happened a few times to the point where I've thought there seems to be something where he wants that attention more than the other dolls are getting, and he doesn't like it. He's supposed to be a teenager. That's what so I thought maybe he's stroppy and he's like, right, talk to me. I don't know. So I thought that was interesting, because to be trying to have a session with another doll and then have a voice that I recognised from previous sessions with Harry saying it's not Edna, it's Harry, like that. That really, was quite interesting to me. But yeah, no, I didn't really give it too much thought about where I positioned them in the house. But I do keep Harry the clown in the lounge just to annoy everyone and unnerve people.
I think clown dolls are a strange thing, Fiona, because I think it depends on your vintage, because the concept of how clowns have gone from being a mainstay of children's entertainment to now being often seen as creepy and weird, I think is one of those things that I think pop culture has bled in to people's belief systems here. And I'm not really sure where you can begin to sort of look at when the concept or the perception of a clown started to scare people. I mean, it depends. Some people have said it's because of John Wayne Gacy and the fact that he was a clown in one of his many sort of out-of-work activities, who turned out to be a horrendously awful serial killer preying on vulnerable people. But he didn't kill people dressed as a clown. He just did a clown. You know, people aren't scared of people who work in political parties because he also did a lot of politics. But the fact he did clown work seems to be the creepy clown, because he's often called the creepy clown serial killer, but he didn't kill anybody dressed, well, not that we're aware of, he killed anybody dressed as a clown. But also you've got Poltergeist, which I think is the first example of a haunted clown doll trying to kill one of the children in the film, which, even as a lover of horror films, as a very young person and grew up with them and loved them, Poltergeist was probably the first time, and I'd seen Evil Dead scared me less than Poltergeist, and I think that was because I was looking at a film where I was watching at adults in a situation of terror and fear. And Poltergeist is a suburban family with 3 kids who are being terrorised by ghosts in various levels. And obviously I think it's Robbie, the son, who ends up having that fight with the clown. Do you think it's that kind of pop culture bleed that has changed the perception of clowns and how they're viewed in the modern era?
I do think so. I think I don't think it could be pinpointed to one individual thing, but I think it's probably a cumulative effect, as you said, John Wayne Gacy and Poltergeist, and then obviously in the early 90s with Stephen King's It, huge impact on it, I think. And I think if there's enough of something that uses the theme in that way, in a negative way, it doesn't take too much of a push for the consciousness of the population to start to have that negative connotation with things, you know. It's not something I personally ever, I know lots of, it's quite a common thing, isn't it? People find clowns creepy. It's not something that I particularly experienced. I didn't find them too creepy or anything. And as I said, with my clown Harry, he's quite a cute clown. There's nothing sinister looking about him as such, but he does seem to unnerve people. So there is definitely something there to it, so where that draws from, whether it's just the exaggerated features or whether it's that history of in our culture of creepy clowns, it's probably a mixture of everything, I would think.
Very much so. I think you can judge people's age on whether they've got coulrophobia or not, Fiona, because it for me, the people I've spoken to, a lot of it is to do with Poltergeist more than anything, I think. But like you say, there are so many examples. I mean, strangely enough, It was probably one of the first books I had to put down for a bit.
Really?
Because it really unnerved me, primarily because it manifested as whatever your greatest fear was. And so it wasn't the clown thing that terrified me, it was the werewolf, because werewolves really, I'm a middle-aged man. Werewolves really still send the willies up me. I still enjoy werewolf films because it's the only thing that really scares me. But I'm not scared because they're doing things. The concept of a werewolf I just find terrifying for some reason.
Yeah, no, it is quite a creepy thought, isn't it? That transformation.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
There's not many things in horror, film and books that have scared me too much. Funny enough, the only nightmare I've ever had that's contained like a horror film character, that was Chucky. That's the nightmare I've ever had, and that was Chucky. And that was when I was younger. I just had a dream about the doll pursuing me and chasing me through a shopping centre, and that stuck with me. So there's obviously something about dolls for me, but clowns never really bothered me. So.
I suppose one of the highlights, and it certainly is reading it as well, is dealing with the creators in media and some of the people that have created some of these cinematic icons, really, you could say. Was there a big thrill? Because I suppose the aspect of haunted dolls, people tend to deal with the physical and the now rather than the cinematic. And I think your book is one of those that doesn't try to separate them out. Yes, they're in different sections of the book and you deal with them in that particular order. I think purely for common senses.
Yeah,
sort of the way the book flows, Fiona. But for me, I think it's vitally important that we look at that, because I think that has more to do with it than, people reading about Annabelle and Robert. I think it's the cinematic stories that really sort of instill themselves, as you say, about Child's Play and how Chucky sort of put me on edge, even as a hardened 20-year-old horror veteran at the time. It is strange how that seems to get into people's psyche a lot more than perhaps the real haunted dolls for some. Yeah,
no, I agree. And I almost think, because in the section in the book, I do talk about horror books and horror films that deal with haunted and cursed dolls, and I do interview people that have worked on films. And I think it became quite apparent to me as I studied throughout films, even going back as the 1920s and up to modern day. I thought it was quite symbolic to me how the fear of dolls was used in that way. It kind of showed that there was a reflection there of society and us having that fear, and it was almost like films were used as a way to explore that subject. So there was something about dolls, I believe, that have unnerved a lot of people for whatever reason, and I think horror films tapped into that and explored it and kind of took the theme and ran with it. I do think it's almost a mirror to our fears in a way.
I suppose it is strange. I mean, if you had to say, other than Hugo's, who's your favourite sort of haunted doll, I love the Puppetmaster franchise, because they're just weird. But they are essentially the embodiment of haunted dolls, and they've got this whole backstory that involves the Nazis and secret experiments. And some of the films are really odd but good. Some of the films are really odd and not good. The second one is very odd, where people become human dolls and you see human dolls falling in love, and what is going on here? But also you've got this sort of rotating cast of characters, and they've all got personalities and they all have different talents. They are a strange bunch, the Puppetmaster films. I don't understand why I like those films as much as I do. Even the last couple, which haven't been very good at all, primarily because they've kind of contradicted the entire franchise and how it started, and this kind of anti-Nazi theme that's kind of hidden there. But some of them are very odd, and there's little quirks, like the first film, somebody walks about with a stuffed dog for most of it, that somehow comes alive at the end because the dolls have released some magic into the air. And nobody bats an eyelid that a character is walking around with a stuffed dog for 75 minutes, and then the last 10 minutes it's alive. Nobody says a word.
It's like nothing's off limits in that. Like anything goes, and you just end up accepting whatever madness comes your way, isn't it? But I suppose with horror films, like you said, it's all down to sort of whatever strikes a chord with you, isn't it? I think most of us don't watch those sorts of films expecting it to be realistic, and we're quite willing to go with where the director takes us with it, and you kind of suspend your disbelief for a while, don't you, just to allow yourself to kind of enter that crazy world and just be entertained by it, and you're not really looking for it to do anything more than that. I mean, for me, I really like the Robert franchise.
Yes.
I mean, it's quite a low budget series.
Yes.
Andrew Jones, but I really enjoyed them, and they were quite sort of fun and kooky and different, and there were some bizarre things that happened in that, but I really liked the films themselves as well. I interviewed Andrew Jones for the book as well, because I found the series of his films really entertaining. Sadly, he's passed away, and which is a great shame, because I think he was going to do more work in the Robert world, but what he had created was a lot of fun, I thought.
It's surprising as well that certain films still seem to draw people in, or still have that hold over people whenever they saw them. Trilogy of Terror from the 70s is probably the best example of this I can think of, really. Because essentially, once again, as I mentioned about Dead of Night, we've got the portmanteau sort of format here. You've got 3 interlinked stories that are all connected because Karen Black's in them.
Yeah.
The doll one in that, I speak to people, I hear from people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. That episode, that particular portion of that film has stayed with them 50 years. Fiona. It terrifies them. And I think when you look at it now, sometimes people can be a bit churlish about films and perhaps they've not aged very well. That was so well done then that I can only imagine how shocking that was to some people in 1975. And yet, 50 years on, it still has the power to scare people. It's so well done still.
That's the thing. I think if something's just done well enough, isn't it? And it's not relying specifically on special effects, that sometimes it just manages to really to grip people. And I think sometimes people's early experiences of fear in film as well is what sticks with them. Like you said, something that they've watched years ago and a particular scene might have shocked them, whatever. There's something about that takes root, if you know what I mean, in your mind, and it's something that you carry with you.
Yes.
It's like I said with the Chucky film, when I was younger and I wasn't allowed to watch it, but I snuck downstairs and saw a clip of it as it was on TV and stuff. And I think you can just glimpse something, and if it unnerves you and it takes root in your mind, and it has that power to still scare you years later.
Well, I suppose it is fascinating, I think. I mean, I was very pleased to see you mentioned Pin, because I think that gets overlooked a lot, the Canadian film from the 80s, which is one of those that even at really hardened horror fans, a lot of people missed it because I think it completely bombed in the UK. And it was one of those that even in those heady days of video stores and VHS rentals, it certainly wasn't on my radar till, I don't know, about 20 years later. I didn't see it till sort of, 2005, something like that. And I was like, oh, how on earth did I miss this? Because I watched some right crap in the 80s. And I've seen a lot, I watched a lot worse at the time than that film. And I think it was just one of them. It was the wrong studio. It was the wrong time. It just didn't hit. But it seems to have really garnered a cult following, especially in the streaming era, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's surprising that you get these, but I mean, we see the power of that. I mean, you mentioned the Saw franchise. One of the key aspects of that is Jigsaw, which is this freaky puppet on a bike riding about, which for me spoilt it because I couldn't stop laughing at Jigsaw. He's doing all these awful things, but the doll just made me laugh, and therefore I found it quite enjoyable. These poor people are going through horrendous things, and I'm just chuckling at how this doll looks.
I think that's the thing. Like I said earlier, I think what strikes fear in us is a very unique thing. And I think somebody who might find something terrifying and someone else can watch it and be in stitches laughing, what really works for us and does something in our mind is so individual, isn't it? It's something different for everybody. What triggers that fear off or makes something seem so ridiculous that it can't be taken seriously, Absolutely.
Well, I mean, the Megan films are the prime example of that. I mean, I went into the first one with my eyes wide open, and I did not expect to enjoy it at all, and it really made me laugh because that doll was a right shitbag. But it also did some things that were like morally questionable, but they were the right thing. And that's the thing, I think, sometimes when you have these characters or these situations where, this doll's sentient. Hang on, what's going on here? But then it's also dealing with shitheads, and you're like, But then everybody starts to become a problem to the doll, and therefore it then steps beyond that, because I think that's how they get you, because it's dealing with bullies and awful neighbours and things, and you're like, these people are going to get it, and then innocent people start getting caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
But like I say, Megan, I really enjoyed it because it was silly, but it was a little bit scary as well. But it was the dancing scene, I think, that freaked a lot of people out, because that's just odd.
Yeah. It was the bizarreness of it, wasn't it? But it was a great scene, I agree, and I did enjoy the film as well. I think Megan, along with Longlegs with Nicolas Cage, I love both of those films. I think they're both quite good modern examples of films that use dolls, but they just managed to be really different with it and not just relying on the same old sort of tropes that the previous films have used,
Well, I think finally, Fiona, before I let you leave, and thank you for your time and your conversation today, how do you view this subject after you've gone through this journey with your book, on top of your personal interest in your collection? Have you developed a larger respect for this particular field? Has it not changed you, or has it made you even more cynical because of the plethora of alleged haunted dolls that you can pick up anywhere these days? It would seem it's kind of made you a bit cynical about this subject, that perhaps there will always be people taking advantage of a particular niche, regardless.
Yeah, no, I think it's a mixture, really. I mean, because I've always believed since, my own experiences, I've always believed in the existence of spirits and ghosts. So to me, it wasn't a huge stretch to think an item could be haunted. That wasn't a huge jump for me to make in my mind. So, when I wrote the book, it was more a case of, this book is going to be my research. I'm going to interview people. I'm going to look at true life cases. I'm going to look at the history of certain stories, and then just present it and let the reader decide what they want to make from it. From my perspective, it solidified my belief in haunted objects, but it also made me aware of people who capitalise on it. And so it's just a case of, like in anything in life, though, you'll always have people that aren't doing the right thing. And I think as long as you're looking out for that and just taking everything with a pinch of salt and looking out for those sorts of things, then don't let it distract you from what's quite a fascinating field of study, I think.
They're the kind of people who Meghan should live with.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So how's this move forward in regards to whetting your paranormal appetite? Because obviously you're a very talented writer. You've written on numerous subjects in the past, Fiona. You tend to cover pop culture more than most, and I suppose this is a great example of paranormal pop culture. Is it a field you're wanting to continue developing your career in? Because it's a great book, and I hope it's not the last of this particular field you offer us.
Oh, thank you. I don't want it to be the last. I've already started. It's very, very early stages, so it's nothing's definite about the project. But I have started writing a book on the broader subject, because as I was writing about the haunted dolls in this book, I realised actually how many cases there were of haunted objects in general across the world over the years. Jewellery and antiques and chairs, even just random things that I was coming across that I couldn't include in the book. So at the minute, like I said, early stages, but I've just started kind of collecting notes and cases on the broader subject of haunted objects, and kind of putting that together and seeing perhaps if there's enough interest in that, perhaps when we see what readers think of the book on dolls. So.
Oh, fabulous. Well, I hope so. I wish you the best of luck with it. So, Fiona, where can everybody follow you online, get a copy of this book, and dive into your career and some of your other writings? Okay,
so you can. The book isn't out until October, and you can pre-order it on Amazon at the moment. It's called A Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls, with the publisher Llewellyn, and you can find me on, can you call it Twitter now, or is it X? Prefer to call it. I'm at angel_devil982, or just put in Fiona Dodwell, it should come up. And I'm also have a website called why has my mind gone blank? That's not good. thehauntedattic.co.uk. That's it. Yeah, it's just a little blog that I have guest writers on sometimes, and I do the occasional interviews as well. Like I've interviewed Uri Geller and Kieran O'Keefe. And I just put little bits and pieces on there, so there'll be information on that website too. But yeah, definitely, if you Google it, A Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls, it will take you to links where you can pre-order. So.
Fabulous. Well, I'll put links in the show notes for everybody for your book and also your website, so everybody can keep up to date with that. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me for the first time. I hope I get an opportunity to speak to you again when the paranormal pulls you into publicating another book. I've made a word up there. The paranormal pulls you into publishing another book, and I wish you the best of luck with this. And thank you again for your time. It's been a pleasure, Fiona.
Oh, thanks very much. Thank you.